David, my understanding is you don't have slides, so if you want to start talking, I think your face will pop up onto our screen.
Great. Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for having me, Secretary Moore. And it's hard to follow New York, but it's a great process. And maybe, you know, and I spoke to Secretary Moore before this and said of the states invited here, Massachusetts is the one that does not have a similar commission process in place. So I don't have a similar level of detail to share on, you know, maybe process that would be valuable for this commission to emulate or to learn from. So I guess I'm speaking a little bit more generally and happy to answer questions and be part of the discussion. Massachusetts passed the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2008, a few years after California's AB 32. It set a target in law, actually a legal limit in law to achieve an 80% reduction below 1990 levels by 2050. We've been making great progress there. We have a process that requires my boss and me, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, to issue a clean energy and climate plan updated every 5 years and to set interim targets. So the Global Warming Solutions Act for us required the 80 by 50 final target or final limit and set a range for determination between 15 and 25% for 2020, and then authorized and empowered the Secretary to set interim limits for 2030 and 2040. Back in 2010, we set the 2020 limit at 25%, and we are at 23% below 1990 levels as of 2017, which is our last full data year. Almost ready to issue our full data for 2018. I'll come back to that. I wrote some notes and I said process and patience. This is really, really difficult work. It's very technical. And I guess one thing I've been feeling a lot in the last month, I don't know if people have been seeing, there's been quite a battle going on in Massachusetts between the legislature and the governor right after we issued some landmark, really detailed reports and a deep decarbonization pathways roadmap report, much like the one that Maureen in New York, actually some of the same analysts involved with that. And conversation around that has been very interesting, where the ambition for change is outstripping maybe some of our administrative abilities to achieve everything on the exact timeline that folks are demanding and desiring. So there's great ambition there, and I guess one of my rules of thought, you know, Maureen said it takes about a year. It takes more than a year to get regulations done, and I think that's just sort of a fact. They can be done sooner, that's for sure, but to allow the kind of engagement that's being demanded of government now, and I could say rightly so that it's being demanded of government, but there are competing goals at issue here, and there's at some point the commission I think will need to grapple with transforming its ambition into something that is achievable. And you know, one of the lessons we learned from our analysis, and I think this is really important, is to with some humility pay attention to where your emissions are coming from and the methods for reducing those emissions. So, you know, a lot of people, myself included, watch the energy UK, and that's all wonderful, but each of those places is different. They have different climates, they have different energy systems, they have different governmental systems, and so it's pretty easy to pick something up off Vox and say, I found the answer, it's X, right? And sometimes X just doesn't apply, say, to a Vermont or a Massachusetts. Sometimes it does, that's great. But so having some sort of both ambition and humility at the same time, and then at some point figuring out a way to really set up some processes and trust them and invest in the process, because I don't think any of us are going to find out the answer for every day, every hour, every year from now to 2050. So it's going to take 30 years to achieve this transition. Start to invest in government again. Government's taken a bit of a hit across the country, and thanks to some specific individuals and certain things that have been going on in other parts of the country. But I don't see a way to do this without investing in the process, investing in government, investing and aiming for a target that we all agree upon enough to compromise at least here and there, right? And some of the things we're finding out of our roadmap study is that even if we put solar panels in we would still need more energy, and we would need more transmission lines, right? And we need offshore wind, and yes, there's fishing out in the ocean too, but we can't have no offshore wind, no transmission, no solar, and have clean energy, right? So there's something has to give. There has to be some mechanism that we trust to find a place to site a transmission line and some way to work with other states. And I think Vermont probably understands going into this, but I hate to break it to you, you're a small state. So is Massachusetts, right? Massachusetts is, I deal in numbers all the time. Massachusetts is, or New York is 2.8 times bigger than Massachusetts, right? So sometimes we hear people saying, but New York is ordering more offshore wind than us. They're going to be number one. They're going to be first. I would certainly expect that they'll need more offshore wind, probably about 2.8 times the amount of offshore wind. And that's because they have 2.8 times the people and the load, and the emissions probably. And California is even bigger, right? So there are certain things that sort of skew with economies and skew with tax bases and skew with the ability to affect markets. And one thing that we found through our analysis is that 60% of our emissions come from, as I have been starting to say, you and me, except you guys are in Vermont. 60% of our emissions come from residential heating and passenger vehicles. So let me say that again. 60% of our emissions that need to be reduced come from you, the person at the street, the senior on fixed income, right? There is no bad guy left, at least in Massachusetts, to point the finger at, turn the screws on, and break their will so they stop emitting. That's you. We have to break your will, right? I can't even say that publicly. What I'm trying to say is it is a very difficult situation where we need to transition 3 million homes, and think of that, 3 million construction projects in 30 years, 5 million car sales. And the state of Massachusetts doesn't control the federal auto industry, right? So I'm not saying we can't be ambitious. I'm not saying we should put some level of understanding. Truly, if you really want to solve climate change, you sort of have to sink all the way into it and allow some people to be in the details and advise you well on what you're going to be arguing for certain things in DC. That's fair, right? But there are some things that are probably outside of the control purely of the state of Vermont that will affect your ability to reduce emissions. So I don't mean to be a bummer, but it's a really difficult process. I think this process is fantastic. But that everybody needs to go in wanting the number one thing to do is to achieve the emissions reductions necessary. That is a process in itself, which I think can be done with care, can be done with attention to equity, can be done with attention to the values we place in other land use aspects. But when any one of those comes to such precedent, it has to be number one, then the climate change mitigation effort is no longer number one, and it basically stops. It's so difficult that unless there's some unity around that purpose, it's really difficult for it to go forward. So why don't I stop there? Like I said, I probably have the least relevant process and experience in this kind of work, but I'm really glad to be part of the discussion, and particularly to be followed, I think, by Hannah, who has great experience and is really great to work with. We work together all the time, which is part of this, working together across states to make this happen. So thanks very much.